This is the Pulsar Superglide3 Type S, a rather unrenowned hard pad that slipped into the glasspad world in late 2025. Now, despite this being the third iteration of Pulsar's Superglide series, oddly there wasn't and isn't much talk about this iteration, which is quite surprising to me, as the pad has great performance, solid build quality, and a fantastic base implementation, along with several other notable features, but due to its uncoated nature and its unique surface texturing, the pad does have the traditional weaknesses found on all uncoated hard pad types. But despite this, the pad performed very well over my testing, and while it's not perfect, it is a very solid offering from Pulsar in my opinion, and one that absolutely should be getting more attention. And in today's video, we're going to take a deep dive into the design, material, surface texturing, performance profiles, pros and cons of the Superglide 3 Type S, and much more. But before we dive in, a big thank you to Pulsar for sending the Superglide 3 Type S over for review, and a massive thank you to all the channel members for supporting my work and making in-depth review videos like this possible. And as always, this review will be completely unbiased, meaning you'll get my honest opinions of everything I review here on the channel, with no affiliate codes, brand bias, or paid promos. But without further ado, let's get right into today's episode of the mel0n Review. For testing parameters, I use the Superglide 3 Type S for around 2 weeks, daily driving the pad for both work and gaming use. For skates used, since the included stock dots are interesting to say the least, I only use them for a couple days and opted to replace them with more consistently performing aftermarket skate types. And for sleeve usage, since the pad is uncoated, I did end up using several aftermarket sleeves during my testing, as they drastically improved the pad's usage experience, which we'll talk more about later in this video. For versions, the Superglide 3 is available in 4 colorways: white, black, green, and red, but as you can see, the red version has a different design from the other colorways. For sizes, the Superglide 3 only comes in 4 sizes as of recording this video: a medium size, which is 330 by 260 by 1.5 millimeters, a large size, which is 420 by 330 by 1.5 millimeters, an extra large size, which is 490 by 420 by 1.5 millimeters, and lastly the extra large E size, which is 500 by 450 by 1.5 millimeters. However, while Pulsar is advertising that the Superglide 3 is 1.5 millimeters thick, this measurement only reflects the glass's thickness and doesn't account for the base's thickness, as in reality, my pad's total thickness is approximately 2.8 millimeters. So keep this in mind, as the pad isn't nearly as thin as Pulsar advertises, and as such, I'd like to see Pulsar update the marketing for the pad to better reflect its true thickness. And for pricing, the medium size retails for $49.95 USD, the large size retails for $84.95 USD, the extra large size retails for $94.95 USD, and the extra large E sizing retails for $104.95 USD. Now, there are also special editions of the Superglide series pads available, such as the recently released mel0n edition. However, these pads differ in their design and performance compared to the standard versions of the Superglide, and they're also limited stock, not constant production like the standard versions. And notably, Pulsar also offers their Buy You customization for the Superglide 3, where you can customize the pad's design or upload your own. Oddly though, Pulsar doesn't really advertise this, but this is a great option to see, as very few brands offer customizable hard pads that have good consistent performance. And in today's video, I'll be reviewing the extra large size of the Superglide 3 Type S in its beautiful green colorway. For packaging, the Superglide 3 comes in a rather unique packaging style compared to that of other hard pad types. As well, it's made of cardboard, it's a layered typing, which makes it surprisingly protective despite its material. Now, obviously, it's not to the same extent as the hard case packaging used by other brands, and it's also not as reusable, but it will adequately protect the pad during transit, as mine was handled quite roughly, but thankfully, the packaging took the brunt of the abuse, and the pad itself was unharmed. For appearance, the packaging is also fairly simplistic, having the expected Superglide branding across it, but notably at the top, the packaging lists the pad's material along with its size, color, and estimated performance, which is a really nice thing to see, as oftentimes hard pad packagings don't share much if any information about the product itself, so I'm glad to see Pulsar use a more informative packaging style here. Opening the box by sliding the outer cardboard layer off, we're met with the second layer of the packaging, along with the mouse's accessories. The first of which is a Superglide Superglide sticker, which is similar in theme to the stickers we've seen included with Pulsar's other products, along with the same set of 16 UHMWPE dot skates that are included with their Crazy Light series mice. Sadly though, these skates are the older style, being the cylindrical flattened typing, meaning their performance is interesting as I alluded to earlier, but that's a topic for later. Next we have what is the best accessory included with the pad in my opinion, being this large user manual, which is not only multi-language, it states not to use glass skates on the pad with other safety warnings, and on its back it outlines how to set up the pad along with instructions on how to clean and maintain it, and it even includes a guide on how to properly install the included skates, which is another great attention to detail. Now, admittedly, much of this information is commonplace for hard pad users, but I really like that Pulsar included this manual, as for new users, this info is extremely important, and seeing as how most hard pads don't include any such information, this is a great attention to detail from Pulsar, and I would love to see other hard pad brands include similar manuals of their products, and that would drastically improve their usage experience for first-time users. Aside from the accessories, inside the second layer of the packaging we'll find the third layer, which unlike its cardboard counterparts is made of a denser foam, and we can remove it by unclipping some flaps in the second layer, and once removed and nested inside it, we'll find the pad itself, which, as is typical for many hard pad types, comes with a protective plastic wrapper around it, and on its base there is also a protective film installed over it, so be sure to remove this before you use the pad. Now, while the Superglide 3's packaging is okay, accessories are definitely a weakness, as the pad doesn't include a cleaning cloth or an arm sleeve, which absolutely should be included with any hard pad type, but especially with uncoated types like the Superglide. And seeing as Pulsar already makes arm sleeves, I would have loved to see one included, or at least have an option to bundle a sleeve with the pad, but alas, since one isn't included, and given the aforementioned debris and moisture issues, be sure to get a good quality arm sleeve if you're considering the Superglide 3, and we'll talk more about its moisture and debris issues later in this video. Moving on to build quality and QC, as a preface to this segment, keep in mind that my pad was sent to me directly by Pulsar, so take the build quality and QC of my unit with a grain of salt. But overall, and seeing as this is a hard pad, the Superglide 3 is surprisingly well built and QC'd, as the pad's aluminosilicate material is well implemented, but notably due to the unique texturing style, the surface isn't as utilizable as other hard pad surfaces, as pushing your mouse into the pad doesn't increase its friction coefficients by a significant degree, so there's no real dynamicism to the Superglide 3's frictions, which is something to keep in mind if you're considering the pad. But despite its uniqueness, the surface texturing is well etched and consistent, with no deviations in its X or Y axis frictions, and there are no redistribution or dead zones from my inspections and testing, which is great to see. Moving on to the rest of the pad, the edge implementation is great as it's beveled, not rounded. Personally speaking, the beveling isn't as gradual as I'd like to see, but regardless, it's much better than the rounded edge styles we've seen used on other hard pad types, and it makes the desk to pad transition for the Superglide decently smooth. The pad's base is also a notable highlight, as it is one of the best base types I've seen on a hard pad to date, at least in my experience, and not only does it perform fantastically, it doesn't have any centering or bubbling issues, which is great to see. For its glass and as outlined on the outer packaging, the Superglide 3 uses aluminosilicate glass, the traditional layered typing, which measures 1.5 millimeters thick. Now, we've talked about the benefits of aluminosilicate glass many times here on the channel before, but in case you're not aware of why it's superior to other material types, compared to traditional soda lime glass, aluminosilicate glass has aluminum oxide added into it, which is the key to its superiority as it gives it better strength, durability, impact, and chemical resistances. Now, to explain the science behind why this aluminum oxide matters so much, the added oxide acts as a network former in the glass, bridging the gaps that form at the end of the silica molecules in traditional glass types, resulting in the material's molecular structure being a tightly woven mesh instead of the looser, disjointed structure found in traditional glass types, which gives this aluminosilicate material its aforementioned benefits. Now, aluminosilicate glass in its natural state due to its strengthening doesn't need to be tempered, unlike soda lime glass types. However, as expected for a hard pad use case, the surface of the material has been tempered to further improve its strength, durability, and resistances. Let's talk about that process next. For tempering, and as alluded to on the pad's product page, and as expected for this material typing, it's been tempered via an ion exchange process, the tempering process that's been used for the majority of hard pad types, specifically ones that use this aluminosilicate glass. Now, during this tempering process, sodium ions are swapped for potassium ions on the material's surface, and due to the larger ionic radius of the potassium ions, as they're jammed into the surface's molecular structure, it transforms into a layer of compressive stress, which admittedly is the same end result of thermal tempering processes in which the material is strengthened by heating the material to its softening point, then blasted with cold air to return its surface to a solid state, while the core cools at a slower rate, creating compressive stress between the material's core and surface. However, with thermal tempering, due to the cooling processes, distortions in the material can occur, and the strength of the tempering isn't to the same degree as ion exchange tempering, hence why more and more brands have opted to use ion tempering instead of thermal tempering on their products, especially considering aluminosilicate materials, due to their increased durability, has a much higher softening point than traditional soda-lime glass types, which makes thermal tempering this material extremely difficult. Now, as the end result of this tempering process, as mentioned earlier, it further improves the natural strength and durability of the aluminosilicate material, making it even more resistant to scratching, impacts, chemicals, and other types of wear and tear. And into this tempered surface layer, the pad's texturing has been etched, so let's talk about that process and more about what makes it so unique next. For surfacing, and as mentioned earlier, the Superglide 3 is using a rather unique surface texturing, but notably, unlike the more textured surfacings we've seen used on other hard pads, this texturing is a micro style, meaning it's quite subtle in its feel and rather unique in its performance compared to other hard pad types. Now, looking at the pad surface under the microscope, we can see that the pad's texturing is defined by tiny peaks randomly scattered across the pad's surface, but interestingly, unlike most hard pad texturings, which commonly have rather pronounced peak and valley like designs to them, the surface here is a more flattened style, as while there is some depth to it, it's a much flatter typing overall, as the valleys between the texturing peaks are very shallow. Now, this texturing style does have the benefit of delivering a very consistent performance profile along with minimal degrees of textural and audio feedback, but it can be a double-edged sword, so to speak, as due to the lack of depth, it makes the pad very prone to moisture and debris issues, which is something we'll talk more about in a moment. Now, for the etching process, due to the material and its tempering, traditional dry etching processes such as sandblasting or laser etching can't be used, as the material is so strong it resists these processes, and as such, and as expected for a modern hard pad typing, the pad's texturing is etched via a wet etching process, specifically a chemical etch. Now, if you're not familiar with how wet etching works, in this process, the surface of the material is exposed to an acidic bath, and depending on the acids used and the number of stages and several other factors, the acids will eat away at the surface silica, etching in various types of texturings into it. But since the surface etching is done chemically, not physically, this etching process is isotropic, meaning that the etched texture is consistent across the pad's entire surface, which is why more and more brands have started to adopt this etching process, as dry etching processes such as sand or laser etching are quite prone to redeposition and or consistency issues, which can result in dead zones, physical bumps, or even axis frictions in the etched texturing. Whereas wet etching processes, due to their chemical nature, are not only immune to redeposition issues as the removed silica is dissolved, not displaced, the etching is also more consistent due to the isotropic nature of the acidic reaction, meaning that this wet etched texturing is free of any dead zones or uneven axis frictions, as mentioned earlier, and this etching style also has the benefit of being more customizable, as with various acid stages and other factors, the etched texturing can be quite variable, which is why we've seen so many rather unique hard pad texturings pop up on the market as more and more brands adopt this etching style. And as I just mentioned, and from my inspections and testing, the pad's texturing is consistently etched across the pad's surface with no redeposition issues or dead zones, and the RA and RZ values of the surface texturing, while being more parallel than what we commonly see on hard pads, is consistent, giving the pad even X and Y axis frictions across its entire surface. But as mentioned earlier, due to the subtleness of the texturing style, the Superglide 3 surface can't be utilized to increase the pad's friction vibration coefficients, as pressing your mouse into it doesn't do much in all honesty, and if there is any increase in friction, it's only by an extremely slight degree, meaning that there's no real dynamicism to the pad's performance profile, like what you'd find on other hard pad types with more pronounced texturing styles. Now, this isn't a bad thing, as Pulsar appears to have designed the Superglide 3 with a more consistent performance profile in mind, as the subtle texturing style gives the pad great and consistent performance, but it is something I wanted to note considering more usable hard pad texturings have become more commonplace, especially as of late. It's also worth noting that the Superglide 3, due to its unique texturing, has slightly below average wear rate when it comes to skates, meaning that all skate types will have the expected or slightly extended lifespans, which further improves the consistency of the pad's performance. And for sensor compatibility, I tested the Superglide 3 with the Pixar 3395, 3950, 3955, and 3970 series sensors, along with the Logitech Hero 2, and over my testing I didn't run into any tracking, skipping, or other incompatibility issues. But that said, when it comes to the Hero 2, since we've seen this particular sensor have random issues with other hard pad types, while I didn't experience any issues, you might experience some if you do plan on using the Hero 2 on the Superglide 3. But to be clear, this is due to the oddities of the Hero 2 sensor, not the implementation of the pad's surface texturing. And lastly, one aspect of the Superglide 3 I was confused about was whether it was coated or not, as the product page and box don't state whether the pad is coated or uncoated, but after some digging, I found a post on their support website stating that the pad is indeed uncoated, and I double checked this with Pulsar directly, and this is indeed the case. Now, seeing as the pad has pretty poor moisture and debris resistance, this admittedly isn't too surprising, but I wanted to clarify this as the product pages are rather ambiguous as to whether the pad is coated or not. For the effects of moisture, dust, and other debris sources, due to the shallow microtexturing and as I mentioned a moment ago, the pad is quite prone to moisture and debris related issues. As due to the lack of a hydrophobic coating, moisture does make the pad's surface quite sticky, as the surface texture is so shallow there's not much depth to it, unlike the texturings we've seen on other hard pad surfaces, meaning that moisture sources can make the pad rather sticky to skin as it doesn't have anywhere to drain into, and due to the lack of an oleophobic coating, sweat, oils, and other smaller debris particles can blend and adhere to the pad's surface, and again, since the texturing is so shallow, any buildup on the pad's surface is rather pronounced, as there are again no deep valleys in the texture for debris to fall into, meaning that slow spots can develop much faster and much more frequently here on the Superglide 3 than any other hard pad I've seen to date. Now, this is the case for many uncoated hard pad types, and you can help mitigate the aforementioned issues by wiping the pad frequently with a microfiber cloth, and deep cleaning it often can also help a lot as well, but I would also highly recommend using an arm sleeve, as not only does it completely mitigate the moisture related issues as it acts as a barrier between your skin and the pad's surface, it also prevents sweat, dead skin, oils, and other debris sources from making contact with the pad's surface, which significantly decreases the rate that slow spots develop on the pad's surface. Now, in fairness to Pulsar, the debris and moisture issues here are typical of all uncoated hard pad types, but due to the unique surface texturing, it does highlight these issues more so than any other hard pad type I've tested to date, and due to this, I'm honestly floored that Pulsar didn't include a cleaning cloth or an option to bundle an arm sleeve with the pad, as these accessories are essentially necessary to make the pad's usage experience on par with that of other hard pad types. So again, if you're considering the Superglide 3, keep the aforementioned debris and moisture issues in mind, and be sure to get a good quality arm sleeve and cleaning cloth for the best usage experience here. Moving on to performance profiles, interestingly enough, Pulsar isn't providing any specifics about the Superglide 3's performance, as they only state that the surface delivers a fast glide and a smoother, more consistent feel that's designed for players to demand maximum speed with seamless control, and later in the product page they also state that the surface has a fast glide with good stopping power, but again, Pulsar is being a little bit ambiguous as to the specifics of the pad's performance, which is odd seeing as other brands offer much more detailed, accurate descriptions of their product's performance profiles. This becomes even more confusing as the Type S in the name hints at the pad being speed focused, which is further reinforced by the graph on the front of the packaging. Now, the reason for this, I assume, is that brands often market hard pads compared to their existing pads, and we've seen Razer, Asus, and several other brands do this with their hard pad releases. And while it is true, as compared to Pulsar's fabric pads, obviously the Superglide 3 is faster, but when compared against other hard pad types, the Superglide 3 errs more in the controlled side side of the spectrum, especially when used with the included dot skates. And as such, and based on my experience with the pad, I'd estimate its performance profile to fall into the balance adjacent categories, but as is the case for all hard pad types, depending on the skates used, the pad's performance profile and its degrees of physical and textural feedback will vary. Also, keep in mind that since the pad is made of glass and as is outlined in the user manual, you can't use glass, gems, ceramic, or steel skates on the Superglide 3, as they can not only damage the pad's surface, they also have the worst performance, so be sure to stick to felt, PTFE, hardened PTFE, and UHMWPE material skates on all hard pad types for the most consistent performance and the best usage experience. Now, moving on to the pad's performance profile with various skate types, and starting off with the usage experience when using 100% PTFE material skates. Due to this softer material type and its natural lower friction coefficients, this skate type speeds up the Superglide 3 quite a bit as it lowers its degree of initial, dynamic, and braking frictions, which makes the pad well suited for dynamic and tracking aiming. It can still be used for static and flicking aiming, but the low degrees of dynamic and braking frictions can impact this use case slightly, and as such, this skate type gives the Superglide 3 a balanced speed performance profile. However, they do have the shortest lifespan as hard pad surfaces wear down softer material types like PTFE quite quickly, so keep that in mind, and be sure to replace the PTFE skates whenever you notice them slowing down to keep the pad's performance profile consistent. And due to the material's softer typing, the degree of audio and physical feedback from this skate type is quite minimal, and to demonstrate, here's how a few types of 100% PTFE skates sound on the Superglide 3. Moving on to hardened PTFE material skates, while they are made of the same material as the previous skate type, they've undergone a hardening process which obviously makes their material harder and slightly increases their natural friction coefficients, which in conjunction with the pad surfacing increases the Superglide 3's degrees of initial, dynamic, and braking frictions, which makes the pad more well-rounded, being well suited for both dynamic and tracking as well as static and flicking aim types, shifting the pad's performance profile more into the balance category. Another benefit to the hardening of this material is that it makes the skate type much more durable than 100% PTFE types, meaning that the skates will have a longer lifespan and more consistent performance, but the hardened material does increase the degrees of audio and physical feedback felt from them, and to demonstrate, here's how a few types of hardened PTFE material skates sound in the Superglide 3. And lastly, when using UHWMPE material skates, such as the included dots, this material is not only extremely durable, it also has a higher friction coefficient than the aforementioned skates, which combined with the surface texturing increases the Superglide 3's degrees of initial, dynamic, and braking friction significantly, which in turn makes the pad much better suited for static and flicking aiming, slightly less so for dynamic and tracking aiming, but it still can be usable, and the increased friction shifts the pad's performance more into the balance control category. And due to the harder, more durable material typing, this skate type has the longest lifespan and the most consistent performance, as their wear rate is much lower than that of other skate materials. But the trade-off to this is their hardness and higher friction nature does increase the degrees of physical and audio feedback, more so than the other skate types. And to demonstrate, here's how a couple types of UHWMP material skates sound on the Superglide 3. And as a note, while some skate types increase the pad's textural feedback, keep in mind that since the surface texturing is a more subtle typing, as mentioned earlier, the pad has a smoother feel compared to most hard pad types. And even when used with more durable, harder skate materials like UHWMPE, the degree of textural feedback from the pad is lower or somewhat even to that of most hard pad types. And if you plan on using UHWMPE material or even hardened PTFE material skates on the pad, keep in mind that these skate types do need to be worked in even prior to use, and you can do this by installing them on your mouse, and while pressing firmly into the pad's surface, create a large figure 8 motion for approximately 60 seconds, and doing so will fully break in the skates, allowing them to perform similar to how outlined a moment ago. Now, from my experience, and given the pad's more controlled nature, I found hardened PTFE skate types the best pairing for the Superglide 3, as it gave the pad the most well-rounded performance profile and made it very well suited for all aim and game types, but you can always use other skate types to shift its performance profile to better suit your needs. Just be mindful of the pros and cons of each skate type, and that the pad's performance profile stays within the balance or balance adjacent categories from my experience. And keep in mind that the outline performance profiles are estimates based on my experience and testing. With different centimeter per 360 skate types and sizes, the pad can perform differently, so keep that in mind. For the stock skates, the Superglide 3 includes a sheet of 16 UHMWPE material dot skates, which are the same type of seat included with their older Crazy Light series mice. And while on one hand I'm happy to see this skate type included, on the other hand, and as we talked about before, the design of Pulsar's dot skates is less than optimal to say the least. Starting off with their dimensions, these skates measure 6.6 millimeters wide and around 0.9 millimeters tall, but unfortunately they have the older flattened cylindrical shaping, not the updated slightly beveled design that Pulsar's newer dot skates have, like the skates that were included with the X2N Crazy Light. And due to this older shaping, the edges of these skates are rather sharp, and when used on other hard pads, specifically ones with more rougher, textured surfaces, these dots have a very high degree of textural feedback, as the edges of the skates can scrape against the texturing, while their larger surface area results in more friction. And since the skates still lack a buffering layer, all this feedback goes right through the skates and makes them sound very scratchy. But since the Superglide surface is more of a subtle typing, to my surprise, these skates actually felt okay, lacking the extremely rough usage experience I've come to expect from them. They aren't as smooth as a skate with a buffering layer would be, to be clear, but they were much more palatable on the Superglide 3 than they are in other hard pad types, and they perform similar to other UHMWPE material skates, though slightly more controlled due to the larger surface area. But since they still lack a buffering layer, and while they were texturally more palatable, their audio feedback was still extremely high, which made these skates not the most pleasant to use. And to give you an idea of how loud they are, here's how the stock dots sound of the Superglide 3. Now, I've been wondering for a long time as to why Pulsar made their dots with this weird cylindrical shaping, but seeing as they likely based their design for use on the Superglide series pads, that explains a lot, as while they're usable on Pulsar's hard pads, their usage experience on other hard pad types is less than ideal. And as such, I would love to see Pulsar rework these skates to be similar to the ones that were included with the X2N CL having the beveled edge, but add a proper buffering layer to them and include more than 16 skates, as with those changes, Pulsar's dots would be solid offerings in all honesty, comparable to aftermarket options, but in their current form they're still quite underwhelming, and I would only recommend using them temporarily until you can get a set of proper hardpad optimized skates that have a buffering layer, as the pad's usage experience with those skate types is vastly superior to that of the included ones. For edges, and as mentioned earlier, the Superglide 3 utilized a beveled edging, which Pulsar is advertising as their soft R edge finishing, which is an interesting naming to say the least. But as expected, this is the same 45 degree or 2.5D edge beveling we've seen adopted by many other hardpad types as of late. Now, compared to the rounded edge style used on the previous iterations of the Superglide and other hardpad types, this updated beveling is obviously a major improvement, as its slope design in conjunction with the pad's 2.8mm thickness reduces its ledge-like nature and makes movements across or against them much smoother, significantly reducing drag, which is particularly important on the smaller sizes of the Superglide 3 and makes the desk-to-pad transition relatively smooth here. But since the edge beveling is only 45 degrees, not a smoother typing, if you use dot skates, and specifically the ones that aren't rounded, like the stock dots, they can still get caught on the pad's edges, so keep that in mind, and due to this, I would opt to get the larger versions of the Superglide 3 to prevent this issue, especially if you play on higher centimeter per 360s. Now, while the uniquely named edge beveling here on the Superglide 3 is good, on a future iteration, I'd love to see Pulsar adapt a more gradual edge beveling, similar to the edge bevelings that Glassworks and Wallhack have used on their products, as a more gradual sloped edge beveling makes the pad's edge essentially invisible, nullifying any potential drag or skate catching issues entirely, while also making the desk to pad transition nearly seamless, and seeing an edge beveling style style similar to that on a future iteration of the Superglide would be a great improvement to see, but by all means, the current edge beveling is still very well implemented and performs great, and is a notable improvement coming from its predecessors. Moving on to the pad's base, the Superglide 3 uses the same base design Pulsar has used on the previous iterations of the Superglide series, but for good reason as the base is very well designed and performs incredibly well. For material, the base is made of high density silicone, the same material used for the vast majority of hardpad bases, and similar to other hardpads, the base does have a texturing to it, where half of it is matte and the other half is a sticky, glossy type. But smartly, Pulsar has altered the depth of the texturing as the matte segments are shorter than the glossy parts, which is a great attention to detail as this allows air trapped underneath the pad to escape easily, allowing the pad to anchor very strongly when placed down without the slipping issues found on non-textured base types. This style of base texture also makes it incredibly resistant to debris buildup, as even if buildup occurs on the glossy parts, since there's so much surface area, it will take a significant amount of buildup to affect the base's performance, and even in the event that does happen, you can clean it easily, and we'll go over how to do that in a moment. But overall, the Superglide 3's base is very well designed and very well implemented, being one of the best base designs I've seen on a hardpad to date, and hopefully we'll see this base style return on future iterations of the Superglide, as this base performs so well it's better than 97% of the hardpad bases on the market in all honesty. And lastly, for care and cleaning instructions, due to the surfacing design and its aforementioned debris and moisture issues, I would highly recommend cleaning the pad's surface thoroughly before and during use of the microfiber cloth, which the pad absolutely should have included. I'd also recommend deep cleaning the pad every couple of weeks to remove any buildup in the surface, as doing so helps to prevent slow spots from developing, and you can do so by wiping the pad's surface with a microfiber cloth wetted with warm water. You can also use a glass cleaner if there are any stubborn debris spots on the pad's surface. And for the base, it can be cleaned with a damp cloth or spray cleaned with a shower head set to cold water. However, if you clean the base this way, be sure to remove any water resting at the seam between the base and the glass, as prolonged exposure to water could affect the adhesive that holds the pad together, so keep that in mind. And as is the case for all hard pad types, do not use any hard cleaners and acids on the pad's surface, as they can damage the pad, and most importantly, never use a hair dryer to dry the pad's base. Instead, just dab it dry with a towel or let it air dry instead. Alright, in closing, overall the Superglide 3 Type S, again despite it being a rather unrecognized pad, is actually a fairly solid offering from Pulsar, as it supports full customization via Pulsar's By You program. The pad's packaging is pretty protective and the included user manual is a really nice attention to detail. The aluminosilicate material is well implemented and tempered, and the surface texturing is well etched, though it is rather unique due to its shallower micro-texturing styling, but it does give the pad a smoother, less textured usage experience and very consistent performance profiles, though it's worth noting the pad is much more controlled than advertised, being balanced or balance adjacent in its feel with various skate types. The pad's edge beveling is good and fairly low profile, but I'd love to see an even more beveled edge on future iterations, and the pad's base is fantastic, one of if not the best hardpad base styles I've seen implemented to date. However, as mentioned earlier, this pad isn't perfect, as the pad is thicker than advertised, having a total thickness of 2.8mm, not 1.5mm. The packaging, while protective, isn't as good as the hard case packaging used by other brands, and its layered design makes repackaging the pad for storage or transport a rather laborious process. The pad doesn't include a cleaning cloth or arm sleeve, and there's no option to bundle one of Pulsar's ES arm sleeves with the pad, which is very disappointing. The pad's uncoated nature, in conjunction with its shallower microtexturing, makes the pad very prone to moisture and debris related issues, particularly when it comes to slow spots, meaning you'll have to clean the pad frequently and wear an arm sleeve for the most consistent usage experience here. The stock skates, while they perform okay on the Superglide 3 specifically due to its texturing, have very subpar performance on other hard pad types due to their cylindrical shaping, and they also lack a buffering layer, meaning their usage experience pales in comparison to that of aftermarket skates, and I would highly advise getting a proper set of aftermarket skates if you plan on getting the Superglide 3. But despite its issues, many of which are expected due to the pad's uncoated nature, once you account for said issues by using proper skates and an arm sleeve, the Superglide 3 Type S actually performs very well, much better than I expected, as it's actually comparable to the majority of hardpad types available on the market, just of course a little more controlled and in a slightly thinner form factor, which makes the pad's rather unrecognized nature even more confusing, as for an uncoated hardpad it's a very solid offering, and I'm surprised more people aren't using the pad, as even with its issues in mind, it's still a good pad in my opinion. But with that said, on a Superglide V4, I would love to see Pulsar experiment with a coating, as having something to combat the debris and moisture issues would make the pad infinitely better in my opinion. I'd also love to see them improve their packaging and accessories, as making the pad easier to transport and including proper hardpad optimized skates, a good quality cleaning cloth, and an arm sleeve would improve the pad's overall usage experience, and hopefully we'll see Pulsar further refine the Superglide series going forward. But with that, that's everything for today's episode of the mel0n Review. Thank you very much for watching, and thanks again to Pulsar for sending the Superglide 3 Type S over for review. If you enjoyed the review, consider leaving a like on this video and getting subscribed to the channel, and maybe share a video with a friend who's looking for a new hard pad. And if you want to support my efforts here making these in-depth reviews and the Teardown project, consider becoming a member here on YouTube, as that is the best way to directly support the channel. And being a member also gives you early ad-free access to all upcoming content. So if you'd like to support what I do here, consider becoming a channel member today. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the mel0n Review. Peace.